You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is financial consultant and wealth manager Richard Knowles of Knowles & Associates in Vancouver. Merry Christmas, Richard.
Merry Christmas to you.
The top 3 financial stories of the year, according to the Financial Post: oil, Tim Hortons, and Jim Flaherty, the former finance minister. Well, oil, I think, is the number one story. Such a plunge in the price of oil. Is this good or bad in the long term, Richard?
Oh, I don't know. There's good and bad things. Let's put it this way. There's good and bad things on both sides of the fence for oil. I love oil dropping for a couple of great reasons. The fact is the consumers are winning. It's a winning issue for the consumers. It's a winning issue for inflation. It's keeping inflation down. In fact, it's creating a type of deflation, which is healthy for environments in short spurts. And frankly, it's just great for most consumers to be saving money finally. And if the honest, frank matter is that oil has dropped about 40 to 48%, I believe. I'm not sure the exact number. It's around over 40% since certainly, I believe, since last year. Year over year, it's dropped over 40%. And yet, you look at the gas prices today, and they haven't dropped that amount. You see them dropping, but they're actually, I believe, making more money now in profit than they were before, and potentially anyway. The pricing of oil and gas in the Canadian market has always befuddled me. And if anybody's near the border, take a drive over, and you know exactly what I mean. Pump your tank up with gas over the other side of the border. There's a lot more competition. There's a lot more internal battling for oil and getting people to your tanks, that you can see real competition at work, real capitalism at work, at least in oil and gasoline for your cars. Anyway, yeah, that's the big news. But on the flip side to that, the negative side, Canada's an oil producer. It's an oil-producing country, and we suffer generally as an overall economy because the tax revenue drops. However, you can't get oil for free. We still use it. It's still a backbone of most economies. And if it's being cheaper, it just means that products are going to be produced more cheaply. It should be easier to get things to market. All prices should drop. Consumers win overall. And we'll see that come out in the economic growth of our country in other ways. It's a painful transition for a big oil producer, but I think it's a very healthy one. We need the kick right now, and we've become too addicted to this oil in Canada, and we have to find other means to make a good economy.
And people are asking the question, who's going to come out of this the best, the West, Russia, or OPEC? Any thoughts there?
Well, Russia's the worst off, and with the oil price being low, for sure, because they're a big oil producer and they need the money. It costs them more to take it out of the ground. OPEC, it costs, I've heard, about $6 to $7 a barrel to take it out of the ground. So they're just making less profit, but they're such wealthy nation anyway. Generally Saudi and the other OPEC nations doing so well. Their population is impoverished in many ways, although they are coming from a more impoverished area in their history. And so therefore, a lot of the extra money is being kept at the top, but filters down into their system well. But, the quality of life issues, having a little less or more on the streets, not going to make a big difference, because it's really the Saudi princes, the top of the OPEC chain, that's willing to take less income right now. And they're not necessarily passing the loss on to their people yet. But even at these levels, at $50 a barrel, they're making copious profits. It's really the more expensive nations that take more money to get the oil out of the ground, such as Russia, and certainly Canada, and others that are suffering over this a bit more.
And Russia, one of their moves is their central bank has offered to back $100 billion worth of foreign debt for companies hit by the ruble's shortage.
Yeah, I see this as a struggle to try and prop up their ruble. They don't want another 1998 all over again, where the price of the ruble drops to nearly zero. I saw the other day, if you were watching the news, you can see some advertisements in magazines, etc. They're advertising from the government how to make Christmas trees out of things in your home at this time. So that's one thing that kind of makes you wonder, when they're already sponsoring the idea that you're going to have a lower economy, they're offering ideas that are propagating The idea of using paper in your, garbage, if you like, in your home to make a Christmas tree because people can't afford to buy Christmas trees. That does say a lot to the Russian economy. And this is coming from the top down, advertised in their own newspapers. I saw that on the BBC News. So consequently, we do have this problem in Russia where we have this financial issue, and they're trying to mitigate the depth of the problem by doing this kind of last-minute ditch financial attempts. But it is a desperate attempt to try and prop their ruble and to keep their economy on track.
And Russia's also formed a new economic union with 4 former Soviet states, and I think they probably rely on oil just as much as Russia does as well.
Granted, yeah. And with the Ukraine now currently looking at joining NATO, which has been a big move that's been offered by NATO, they're looking into this now, and if they were to do that, that would, ostracize the Russian group even further.
And of course, the sanctions that Russia already faces because of their involvement in Ukraine, that was hurting their economy before the oil crisis.
Granted, yeah. I mean, they were not in a great position before this started, and now, since that time, it's even escalated even worse. So, and they're entering into their, a tough winter. That's always the time when they don't want to have oil prices, doing what they're doing all over the map. Although in effect, oil dropping would make the consumer at least more affordable, but it's an oil nation. Russia is suffering as a nation, so to speak. And there's a lot of internal problems with Russia. Of course, we all know many of those things through history. But one of the worst is that when a problem happens, they don't try and buffer it at the top. They try and pass it down to the people, which is not a very healthy way to live.
And all the billionaires who have been backing Putin, I mean, he's been a bully with them. I think he might live to regret it because they're the ones who still have cash and they've taken as much as they can out of the country. In fact, Russia has now imposed some currency controls. They say informally, but you know how informal Putin is.
Yeah, exactly. What you see is always a tip of an iceberg of a lack of truth. You're always seeing Politburo kind of stuff where it's really let's put it diplomatic solutions, which the real stories are going on in the back rooms. That's what I'm more interested in. It's very difficult to try and glean that out from the news we've been getting.
Another top business story of 2014, Burger King taking over Tim Hortons and then Burger King moving their headquarters to Canada. And although Burger King denied it was to save tax money, analysts say they saved over $200 million in taxes by coming up to Canuckland.
Yeah, and it makes sense. But it doesn't surprise someone to see that Tim Hortons was was quite successful in their growth model. And so consequently to see a reverse takeover like that where Tim Hortons looks as though they're doing better. And coming in and being able to do that from a political standpoint made sense, but also from a financial standpoint, why not? The laws were there to allow them to do it. Why wouldn't you do it? It just doesn't make any sense otherwise. Of course, the U.S., wanting to try and curtail any kind of tax evasion, even if it's legal tax avoidance, are trying to find new rules, and this one popped up in front of their face, and they went, hold on a minute, let's just change the rules. And that's the key to this whole scenario. It's not what they did. They did everything legitimately, and it was a brilliant maneuver, and I would have done it myself. I don't think anyone would fault them for doing that. What's coming out of it, though, is the U.S. government saying, well, look, we want to find every kind of possible loophole and destroy it and just turn it into a zero possible event for the future. And that's sort of what it's all coming down to.
That's right.
That's why the story's so big.
Yeah, I was going to say the U.S. is relentless, tracking down tax money, going after people who haven't even lived in the U.S. but still hold U.S. citizenship. And I hear something like 38% of the, I call them outside the national sphere of the U.S., have renounced their U.S. citizenship and they're becoming Canadians or Ecuadorians or whatever it takes not to be American. And there used to be a time people had a lot of pride in that. And now it's more about the money.
Well, with Canada, you can become non-resident but still be a Canadian citizen. So you can hold a Canadian passport. As long as you're non-resident for the legal amount of time in a year, you can avoid being taxed as a Canadian resident. And, you move everything offshore and you keep everything in a tax avoidance place like Turks and Caicos. Everything's legal. You've moved offshore. You've moved away from Canada. But in the United States, they tax anyone who is actually a citizen. You could be resident 100% of your time for many, many years outside of the country. But if you remain a citizen with an American passport, you're required to pay American taxes. This is a massive difference, and a lot of people don't fundamentally understand that. Even Americans don't. But they certainly learn quickly if they try and move out of the country. You have to revoke your citizenship. You have to become a citizen of another country to be able to avoid being taxed. So you're taxed by birth, not necessarily by residency. Canada and many countries, most countries, tax you simply by where you reside. If you reside, you move out, and you've paid your fair taxes where you lived in Canada or that country. You move away, you're in another country, you're taxed locally in that country as a resident there. You can remain a Canadian citizen to come back. I think that's a big dishonor to the citizenship of their country. In this way, they really, it's your birth defines the fact that you're taxed, not where you reside. I think that's a horrible way to look at taxation. It's certainly not in the belief system of the Tax Act, and it's certainly not the way the Tax Act was initially or should be currently managed and created for.
Yeah, you end up paying income tax twice, which most people wouldn't feel is very fair. And what services have you received for those taxes if you're residing in another country?
You're not receiving a Canadian just by being a citizen as an American. Just by being a citizen with a passport, you're being taxed even though you're not using the services from which you are being taxed. And that's a horrible way to define the Tax Act.
December 24th is the deadline for tax loss selling in Canada. An important deadline for a lot of people?
Certainly is. I have some things I have to do today to complete a couple of things that were last minute. Of course, it always makes more sense to do it earlier. Some clients or some individuals will do it late simply because they forgot. There was a number of things that were going on in their lives. But it certainly cleans up a lot of things. Very important day. Make that announcement. I think you have.
Yes, check out your tax situation. We'll have more with Richard Knowles right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking to wealth manager Richard Knowles of Knowles & Associates in Vancouver. Richard, the death of Jim Flaherty, the former finance minister, was a shocker. No one expected that to happen right after his retirement. But he guided the Canadian government's financial direction for years. Was it a good direction?
Oh, well, not to speak ill of the dead. I think that there were many things that were wrong, that he did. I've been open about that and honest about that. I can have a differing of opinion, but some of the things that he was implementing were certainly backed by some strong economic reasoning. His procedure and his approach may have even been affected by the fact he was suffering under a type of disease. Some of the actions he took were blatantly outspoken and out of place, according to the critics. Not just my own opinion, according to the critics. So that was quite late in his career prior to his death, and that may have been partially because of his pain or suffering under an unknown disease that he wasn't aware of. So, not to speak ill, as I say, I think there's many things to criticize, but there are many positive issues. He was able to try and bring together a number of ideas that were on the plate for a long time. But I won't hold any bones. I've been a critic of Jim Flaherty. I've never been really a negative critic, I should say, because I've never really been positively enthusiastic about the things he's done, or he had done. He was a finance person, and he was a good finance critic when he was in opposition. However, when he was in action, there were many things that I could have I just seemed to find more things to criticize than to find positive. I think he was a fairly good steward when he was there, just to some degree, but some of the things he tried to change were really not his own decisions. We say that he was the leader, and he can take the blame or take the credit, as the case might be. But ultimately, in the end, I think it's really the backbone of the bureaucracy, of the backbone of the Conservative government that's really making the decisions. He certainly wasn't a leading economist. He didn't have any major degrees in finance. I mean, he was really just a portfolio manager of the financial portfolio. And you come in and you get educated and you're the man of the moment. However, the reality is that he's getting advice from other people. It's those other people that I want to talk to. And I think Jim Flaherty as an individual is probably a good man. And he took a lot of flack for decisions that were probably put onto his plate to make. And he had to take the flack for that. So to be fair to him, he has to take the criticism as the leader of that financial department, if you will. The reality is that I believe that it was the advisors behind the scene that we do not vote for, unfortunately. It's another yes minister show here where we have the bureaucracy and the bureaucrats trying to remain ensconcing themselves in power at the cost of the leaders, and to make them look either good or bad. And that's the shame of it, I think.
Plus, I know you were a big critic of his decision to get rid of income trusts. You said that robbed the Canadian economy of a lot of important cash.
Yeah, to be fair, to be correct about that, he didn't get rid of them. He just taxed them differently, much more vehemently, and he overtaxed them, and that destroyed the benefit of having an income tax or income trust at all. There are income trusts that remain because there are tax benefits and their income is still good enough, but the alternates have been created. However, we took a major global recognition off the face of the earth. Really, we just wiped it out, and we became a backwater investment country again. We were suddenly getting the international attention back in the late 90s, and to give tax benefits to Canadians, particularly because it was an exclusively a Canadian thing, although investors could come to Canada and register Canadian corporations, etc. This was bringing in a lot of international money, and at a time when we could actually afford it. But the government that came in was desperate to make money when they couldn't do it in other ways. And that's my criticism of the current Conservative government and the CPC. I don't see this as a Canadian Conservative government. I see this as a more modern age revampment of the Conservative Party. We can almost call it a Republican style, Americanized Republican Conservative Party, the new CPC under Stephen Harper. So I don't see this as the old Canadian Conservative Party anymore. And that changeover, that more corporate backing of oil, etc. This is to be fair, the Canadian Conservative Party, they've always been pro, companies, pro corporations, but that's not exclusively their right. Liberals have also been there, and NDP to some degree, but they're more pro-labor. And so, when party lines have been drawn, but under the new CPC, it's been oil, and there's been controls over scientific studies. Canadian environmental laws have been overturned. I mean, things which were not the prior Conservative Party's interests, and certainly they supported most of the scientific studies, and even if it was against them, they didn't try and wipe them out and make them quiet the way they have under the current leader. So consequently, I'm very up in arms against the current Conservative state of affairs, if you like, in Canada, and the Conservative Party as they call themselves.
And of course, I wonder if the announced tax breaks they plan to give to only families who are likely to vote Conservative, can they afford to do that with oil being so low now?
Well, we'll see, but it's a political move. We can all see that. I mean, anyone that's got a brain knows that this is a political move. It's not necessarily a necessary move, but it's one to garner votes. I think it's an interesting timing and an unfortunate timing, particularly because they're probably going to change something radically after the fact, and they're hoping ultimately that oil goes back up, which is an irony if you're a conservative government or government of any country wanting oil to go up, to make your own consumers suffer at the gas pumps every day seems to be a rather ironic situation to hope for.
Richard, I hope you and your family have a great Christmas.
And you, and to all your listeners. Thank you.
My guest has been financial consultant and wealth manager Richard Knowles of Knowles & Associates in Vancouver. If you have any questions for Richard, you can send them to Richard K, that's the letter K, at customplanfinancial.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also available on YouTube channel Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.